While I consider the original Dead Space to be the scariest and most atmospheric of the series, my personal favorite would have to be Dead Space 2 from 2011. Not only did I find its enhancements to the core gameplay to be varied and imaginative, but how it built upon the rich lore established in the first game was also gripping. Whenever I play it, I find myself unable to put it down. Like any good sequel, it feels familiar, yet fresh at the same time. Dead Space 1 was very tight and claustrophobic. It took place primarily on a mining ship, the USG Ishimura. The main character, Isaac Clarke, was a silent protagonist, which made everything feel more personal and gave the spooky environment in the game more of an opportunity to speak to the player instead. Dead Space 2 was made far more expansive. Its setting is Sprawl, a massive space station built by the Earth government on the remains of Saturn's moon, Titan. It does feel a bit less intimate than the first game did. Dead Space 2 also places more of a focus on action, with larger and more dynamic set pieces than any of the ones you experienced in the original. It's got a lot more energy to it, faster pacing, but this isn't a detriment to the game. Dead Space 2 balances its action with horror brilliantly. Its change in direction and shift in genre is reminiscent of the film Aliens from 1986. Just like Aliens, Dead Space 2 is a natural continuation of what had come before. The hero has already been introduced to the evil monsters they're forced to go up against, and knows where they stand against them. They may have been pinned to a wall and taken off guard initially, but with time and knowledge, they have the necessary skills and mindset to fight back, bigger and stronger than ever. This vigor injected into the narrative makes sense with these kinds of continuing stories, because it reflects the main character's growing outlook on the situation at hand. Visceral Games made the decision to give Isaac a voice this time around, provided by Gunnar Wright. Some fans of the series were divided on this when it was first announced. While I find Isaac's muteness to be effective in Dead Space 1, I'd be the first to admit that it needed to change in further installments. You can suspend your disbelief in the original. I think the world of the Ishimura is so engrossing that Isaac talking or not doesn't really matter, but maintaining that kind of approach would be damn near impossible without a story reason behind it moving forward. Giving Isaac a voice was great. It allowed him to interact with the other characters he came across in this survival situation more realistically, and he could show much more of his personality too, which is always ideal.
The Ishimura. If the gravity tethers are still functional, I can...
You can snag off Sec and drag it back? Isaac, this is ridiculous.
If I can line the tracks up just for a few seconds, you should be able to get the transport across. Stay ready! And take care of Strauss.
Isaac, no! This is a really bad idea.
I'll stick around. I'm full of bad ideas.
Yours is the last body we need to be reborn. The Makers must be absorbed.
The Makers? You mean me? But Strauss said we could destroy the marker.
Not if we consume you first.
God damn it, I trusted you! Fuck you! And fuck your marker!
Traversal and combat in Dead Space 2 remains more or less the same from what was introduced in the original. There were some tweaks made to the controls though. They've been made a bit more intuitive. Square reloads your weapon now instead of heal, and you don't have to be aiming to reload either. Refilling stasis is done by pressing triangle, and firing stasis while aiming is performed using the same button, which makes a lot more sense. Healing is now the circle button, so all of your important actions that ensure your survival are all assigned to the standard face buttons, all in close proximity to one another. There are more creative uses of stasis in Dead Space 2, moving obstacles, lowering bridges, throwing objects or nearby corpses into explosive security beams to deactivate them. Sometimes you will need to complete this little hacking minigame to search for and rewire connections to open doors or turn on elevators, which are pretty fun. There are several brief crawling sections that have you moving through vents. You'll never be attacked inside them, but they provide an interesting third-person perspective. It's eerie hearing voices or creature sounds nearby, not knowing what awaits you on the other side. Because a lot of these areas are a bit larger and more intricate in Dead Space 2, the developers gave you a way to cycle your guidance system to pinpoint the closest save station, store, and bench on top of the primary objective, which is incredibly helpful. I think the most notable change Dead Space 2 makes to its gameplay, though, would have to be the zero-gravity sequences. They have been greatly expanded. Isaac can now hover using his suit's boosters and fly freely in any direction. L2 makes you go faster, and R2 resets his position, levels him out in case your equilibrium gets all out of whack, which it will, believe me. Solving puzzles becomes a lot more enjoyable in zero gravity, having you articulate and position yourself in certain spots. Avoiding hazards is also satisfying and challenging, because your depth perception might not be as accurate as you think it is in these disorienting, weightless environments. Factor in you juggling your oxygen levels too, just like you did in the first game, and you're in for a damn good time. Isaac wears a new selection of spacesuits in this game that have a bit more color and variety to their designs. The environments you walk around in are much darker overall than the ones in the original Dead Space. At a few points, you need to aim where you want to see using a flashlight, which drastically reduces your field of view and makes fighting enemies a lot harder. Dead Space 2 is significantly more difficult than the first game. Even on the standard setting, leveling up all of my weapons and gear from scratch again, I felt the pushback more prominently. I think it has some form of adaptive difficulty at play. I died a lot more than I did in my playthrough of the first game. There was a lot more trial and error going on. I find the enemies to be more aggressive in Dead Space 2 as well. Countless times you will be flanked by Necromorphs behind you that you didn't even realize were there. Dead Space 2 puts an emphasis on stomping enemies after you kill them to receive additional resources. Rewarding players for this behavior was a nice touch, because I feel many of us were stomping downed enemies anyways to ensure the fuckers were really dead. The stomp in Dead Space plays the same role as the knife in Resident Evil. During very few combat encounters, there will be a hull breach that happens, and you will need to hit a switch to turn on the airlock doors quickly before poor Isaac has his arms caught in it and torn off his body. Nasty. Weapon and rig upgrades work the same as they did in the previous game using collected power nodes. In Dead Space 2, you can spend 5,000 credits to respec all of them if you want to. In the original game, if you placed any nodes on weapons you stopped using, they were simply put to waste. But here, you have a lot more freedom modifying your preferred arsenal. I also love that some of the weapons have special abilities now too, like adding fire damage to their bullets for example. Speaking of weapons, there's a lot of fun ones to choose from in Dead Space 2. You've got returning weapons like the line gun, pulse rifle, flamethrower, force gun, ripper, contact beam, and of course, the plasma cutter, still the most effective and practical when fully upgraded. But you've got new ones like the detonator gun that places mine traps, the Seeker sniper rifle that has 2 levels of aiming, though most of the time, Necromorphs are too close to really use it, and my favorite, the javelin gun. It has a slow firing rate, shooting out these metal rods to impale enemies. It's not always the best choice in battle, especially against the faster Necromorph types, but its alternate fire is incredibly fun, discharging electricity out of the last rod fired, which can damage nearby enemies and even yourself if you're not careful. I love this weapon. It might be my favorite in the whole series. There's a greater variety of Necromorphs in Dead Space 2, which makes the combat even more engaging than before. All the ones that were featured in the original game carry over into this one, but new ones include Stalkers, that are shorter and more intelligent than the rest of the Necromorphs. They hunt their prey in groups, hiding behind objects before violently charging at you. The sections you face them in are like little battle arenas. I'm sure Velociraptors were their primary inspiration. Did I mention they let out these blood-curdling screams? The bodies of the pukers are fucking disgusting. Digestive acid has eaten away at their flesh, and they spew it at you out of their mouths from a distance. The pack are a group of small pale necromorphs, transformed children, that dart towards you in swarms. They go down with single shots, but it's the sheer number of them that spawn that can overwhelm you. Crawlers are reanimated infants that explode when they get near you, or when the yellow sacs growing out of their backs are destroyed. They're introduced during this creepy daycare elementary school sequence early in the game within the Titan Heights residential complex. More on that later. Tripods are larger necromorphs, more slender than the brutes, with long arms and tongues. You damage them by shooting the yellow clusters growing from their elbows or on their tongue. Cysts are stationary growths scattered along walls, ceilings, and floors that release exploding pods if they sense that you are near. You can slowly navigate yourself around them, but I usually just plug them full of a couple bullets to get them out of the way. They make these weird sounds, and in low visibility areas, it can be a pain in the ass finding every last one. And finally, there are nests, a grouping of large tentacles with multiple yellowish-orange sacs that fire homing tentacle projectiles at you. They can only survive in zero-gravity environments, which are the only places you encounter them. So on to the story. Dead Space 2 takes place 3 years after the events of the first game, in the year 2511, following the disastrous outbreak of necromorphs within the mining colony on Aegis 7, which spread into and killed everyone aboard the USG Ishimura. The united governing body of the Earth, the Governing Colonial Alliance, or EarthGov for short, has managed to contain it. However, a member of EarthGov, the Director of Operations in charge of the Titan Space Station sprawl, named Hans Tiedemann, has been conducting more marker experiments there. EarthGov has been trying to figure out a way to control the power of the markers and harness their energy, because of course they are. Since the Ishimura, Isaac has been experiencing violent hallucinations induced by his exposure to the red marker, most of which center around his dead girlfriend Nicole, who had taken her own life on the Ishimura to prevent herself from turning into a necromorph. Isaac has been imprisoned in an insane asylum on Sprawl, and Tiedemann and his scientists have been using special drugs to prevent his mind from collapsing in on itself. They have kept it intact so they can extract useful data from it to create other markers. You see, when Isaac interacted with the red marker in the first game, it had imprinted alien codes and blueprints into his mind that can be used to recreate other markers. A necromorph outbreak would occur on Sprawl, and Isaac would be freed from the mental hospital by a hacker named Franco Delisle. The asylum had been overrun, though, and Delisle is immediately killed and turned into a necromorph. His face disgustingly breaks apart and reminds me of some of those toys of Psycho from Max Steel, if anyone remembers those, or that show in general, for that matter. Not that the rest of the game isn't good, but I think a lot of us would agree that the initial chapters of Dead Space 2 are some of the best sequences in the entire series. When you make your way through the space station, the various tenement buildings where all the innocent civilians are being attacked, ripped apart, and transformed into necromorphs, it's some of the most haunting stuff I've ever experienced playing a horror game. At first, overwhelming levels of screaming can be heard, filling the air, but as you progress, these screams, the evidence of human life, become quieter and quieter. In a laundromat, you come across what sounds like a child trapped inside of a washing machine, yelling for help. They were probably shoved in there as a last-ditch effort by their parents to save their life from the necromorphs. You can't do anything to remove them. Why even try? If you did, they would surely die. You just have to push onwards and try to ignore it. Later, in an elementary school and daycare, you also see a parent, or possibly a member of the daycare staff, go to hug one of the babies they recognize, only to be blown to bits like a pizza pocket exploding in a microwave. Walking through all these places, once happy and brimming with life and energy, now utterly ravaged by this necromorph outbreak, it's very chilling. You feel powerless. You know nothing can be done to stop it. All that matters is your own survival. You have to look after yourself first and foremost. That's the scary reality of the situation. The other strong moments from the first few hours of the game happen within Sprawl's Church of Unitology you enter. Seeing one of the places where all of this marker worship originates is disturbing. The amount of resources that have been pumped into this propaganda factory. It's all manipulation. I like how this section explores more of the backstory of Unitology though, that the church had been started following the death of a geophysicist named Michael Altman, who had studied the original marker and was the one who first revealed its existence to mankind. He died, and Unitologists believe his death was some government conspiracy hiding the truth of the marker from humanity. The idea that Unitology is highly influential with a lot of big corporations in its pocket, not to mention its spiritual and extraterrestrial aspects. Visceral was clearly taking jabs at Scientology and their unorthodox beliefs with Dead Space 2. There are also direct similarities that can be made between Unitology and cults like Heaven's Gate, for example, with their end goal being some form of mass sacrifice, in this case an event called convergence, misguided fools. The Church of Unitology finds itself at odds with the Earth government. They both want markers, but for different reasons. One scientific, as a means of harnessing infinite energy, and the other religious, the spiritual transcendence they believe they'll experience after death, with only a select few knowing of the unholy necromorph transformation that goes along with it. EarthGov and the Church of Unitology are at war and sabotage one another's goals. Isaac is caught in the middle. His escape from the asylum on Sprawl is aided by a woman named Dana Le Guin, who claims that she can help him cure his dementia. But you soon discover that Dana is a Unitologist sent by the church to capture Isaac, so they can use the data in his mind to create their own series of markers. Dana would be inadvertently killed in an ambush by the EarthGov, intended to kill Isaac. Now that they have the information they need from him, he no longer serves a purpose, and they want him eliminated. They also want to ensure the valuable data in his mind cannot be harvested by the Unitologists as well. It's all about maintaining the advantage, having more knowledge and power than someone else. You know how it is. Humanity in a nutshell. In Sprawl's colorful commercial district, Isaac encounters a survivor, a pilot named Ellie Langford, who locks herself behind a security gate and takes out a bunch of necromorphs chasing her. Isaac proposes a team-up, but Ellie is reluctant to do so, believing any partnership would be a liability. The two would slowly learn to trust one another as the story continues. Ellie, at least in Dead Space 2, is my favorite side character in the series. She's very likable, a tough-as-nails female survivor in the same vein as Ripley from Alien. Ellie would eventually encounter a former EarthGov scientist named Nolan Strauss, another patient that had escaped the mental hospital along with Isaac. He had been tasked with studying fragments of the red marker destroyed in the first game, and exposure to it made him go mad, but he seems to know how to access the data stored in Isaac's mind and destroy the new marker that was made from it. Isaac wants Ellie to guard Strauss and keep him alive, but his mental state deteriorates, and whenever you are separated from the two, Strauss attacks Ellie, even bites her at one point. With her life in constant danger, it takes a lot of coaxing from Isaac to calm her down, and not have her just kill him and be done with it. Strauss ends up gouging out Ellie's right eye with a screwdriver. I remember when this happened the first time I played this game. I was not at all shocked or surprised. This man's insane behavior was getting worse and worse. Isaac was being extremely illogical, allowing him to travel with them. I grew angry at Isaac a little bit. Isaac had little regard for Ellie's safety, and it felt like he was even using her at times, just to protect what was clearly a lost cause. I don't even think they get a whole lot of useful information out of Strauss that they couldn't have somehow figured out on their own, and even when they do get what they need, they put up with his murderous tendencies for far too long. They were asking for something bad to happen. It's kind of frustrating to see it all transpire, and if you ask me, I think it's the weakest element of Dead Space 2's story, how inept Strauss makes the main characters appear for a while. Strauss would attack Isaac with the screwdriver he used on Ellie, and Isaac is forced to kill him in self-defense. If you had any sympathy for Strauss, there was none left by that point. It was like putting a sick dog out of its misery. He was an ongoing problem. It sucks what happened to his mental health, but his actions were inexcusable. I'm sorry. The USG Ishimura had been drifting aimlessly in space, and sometime between the events of the first game and this one, the once great mining ship would be docked at the Sprawl space station to be cleansed of necromorphs and hopefully repaired by EarthGov. On their way to the government sector to find Tiedemann and the new marker, the tram the heroes are riding on is forcefully stopped by Tiedemann, who is in control of the station's solar array. Isaac is then forced to re-enter the Ishimura in Chapter 10 to activate the ship's gravity tethers to help pull themselves the rest of the way. Chapter 10 is another one of the high points of Dead Space 2. Getting to re-explore the Ishimura in a completely different way is captivating. It's been locked down under quarantine. The various equipment strewn about and wall patches taped up look to be as effective as small bandages being placed on a gaping infected wound. This section of the story plays with your expectations. There are many callbacks to the original game, moments where you think enemies will pop out at you, but they don't. You don't encounter necromorphs until you get pretty far into the ship. The game builds up the anticipation. You keep asking yourself where they're hiding, if there are even any there at all. What we've got here is a case of workers clocking out before the job was done, and by clocking out, I mean they were torn to shreds and transformed into undead alien monstrosities. My favorite parts of the Ishimura are the ones lit with ultraviolet light, letting you see the splashes and smears of blood littering the walls and floors. Throughout Isaac's walk through the ship, his PTSD takes hold, and he experiences even more intense hallucinations. His visions of Nicole are far more violent in this game than they were in the first, with her attacking you and threatening to kill you. Her manifestation is the result of the marker's continued influence on Isaac, but it's also anchored deeply within the guilt he feels surrounding her death. Nicole was his everything. He tells her that without her, he has nothing. Deep in the heart of the Ishimura, you enter the chamber where the hunter necromorph was once released, and the terrifying realization that you haven't fought one or any variation of one in this game yet sinks in. Oh fuck. Isaac and Ellie would reach the government sector of Sprawl, breaking into it with the help of a giant mining drill they come across. You have to fight a shit ton of necromorphs on top of that thing. They're lured to it because of all the noise. Isaac becomes cornered by a bunch of EarthGov soldiers, but it's hilarious when you turn the power off, breaching security, allowing a bunch of necromorphs to charge in and slaughter the attack dogs sent after you by Tiedemann, and then walking through the horrific byproduct afterwards. Isaac would end up tricking Ellie to board a shuttle and send her off Titan. This upsets her, but Isaac explains that he can't lose Ellie like he lost Nicole. He doesn't want to fail another, someone else he has developed strong feelings for. In the government sector, it's neat how you get to see numerous reproduced markers in various stages of synthesization, either housed in large multicolored vats or encircled with lasers. One of them has you slowing down the laser arms with stasis to get past, all while battling necromorphs that crawl under it. Isaac eventually reaches the large Site-12 marker the blueprints in his mind helped create. This thing is massive. Tiedemann, who had retreated to the base of the marker, contacts Isaac through his rig link and tells him that EarthGov's research is necessary. They are close to finding a way to control the marker's power. Sure they are. Suddenly, due to the large mass of Necromorphs gathered around the marker, a convergence event takes place. The marker flashes brightly, emits loud noises and strong bursts of energy, and the Necromorphs are hurled into the air with a powerful upward thrust of wind, beginning to be consumed into a single biomass. What that biomass actually is will be explained further in my review of Dead Space 3, so stay tuned. Isaac would be drawn to a special diagnostic machine by his visions of Nicole. The machine is able to stimulate the marker data in his brain, unlocking the part of it where it is stored. It does this by jabbing a large needle directly into the patient's ocular cavity so their entire skull doesn't need to be opened up like a can of tomato sauce. This MRI-like machine is one of the more memorable sequences in this entire game because you control the speed in which the needle is lowered towards Isaac's eye. It's absolutely stomach-churning, and the unsettling visual sticks with you. The faster you move the needle arm, the higher Isaac's heart rate rises, and the more erratic his eye movement becomes. I thought I was going to fail this numerous times, but I was impressed with myself. After over 10 years since I've played this game, not remembering the best strategy to beat it, I still succeeded on my very first try, but that also meant I didn't get to see or capture the animation of it killing Isaac. What a shame. After you use the diagnostic machine, you'll find that the door you're supposed to go through is locked. You hear a Necromorph smash through the far wall of the room, and lo and behold, it's Mr. Regeneration Face making his appearance at last. The regenerating Necromorph in Dead Space 2 isn't called a hunter. No, this one is souped up on steroids, and goes by the name of an Ubermorph. It's more gray in color, and has 5 glowing red eyes. Throughout the last 2 chapters of the game, you are forced to battle it. Same as before, you need to dismember the limbs and then stasis the body to slow the regeneration process down. Things are a bit trickier than in the original game though. You need to make sure you're stocked up on lots of ammo and healing items for this one. There's a lot more multitasking going on, with you fighting a variety of other Necromorphs alongside the Ubermorph. It follows you through doors and elevators. It doesn't let up. You need to solve a hacking puzzle and carry a high-ranking officer to open a door with its scanner. All of this with an unstoppable and unrelenting Necromorph right up your ass. Just when you think it's gone, it finds a way to come back. It's extremely nerve-wracking. Isaac reaches Tiedemann, who has become badly burned due to the energy of the convergence. In his weakened state, he tries to kill Isaac with a javelin gun, but Isaac is able to counter him and shoot him in the back of the head instead. The marker has been using hallucinations of Nicole to bring Isaac to it so it can merge with its creator. The final boss of Dead Space 2 isn't as traditional as the hive mind was at the end of the first game. The fight happens inside the confines of Isaac's mind, against the ghost of Nicole. She constantly walks and even teleports towards you. You have to make sure she doesn't make contact, or it results in an instant death. You shoot a bunch of shadowy figures that are shaped like pack Necromorphs, and then shoot Nicole enough to expose the part of Isaac's brain where the red marker still has influence over him. You repeat this process until it's destroyed completely, and in turn it kills and deactivates the Site-12 marker. At the end, Ellie returns to save Isaac, and the reactor core of the Titan station explodes, wiping out everyone and everything that was on it, including that kid stuck in the washing machine from earlier. Thought I'd let you forget about that, huh? While Isaac's mind may still contain information about the markers, the hold they have on him has been wiped clean. With Ellie by his side, Isaac's future seems clearer, brighter. There's a callback to the jump scare at the end of the first game, but this time, thankfully, nothing happens. A sigh of relief. Like I said at the start, Dead Space 2 is my favorite game in the series. While I still believe the original remains the scariest and is filled to the brim with greater atmosphere pound for pound, Dead Space 2 is more fun to play, with the strong additions it makes to the gameplay, injecting a lot more variety with its navigation, puzzle solving, and even a bit of its combat. It does focus more on the action, but still contains some genuinely frightening sequences and jump scares. It finds the happy medium between horror and action, and effectively utilizes both genres simultaneously. The third and final Dead Space game I'll be looking at in my Dead Space retrospective this year is of course Dead Space 3. With this one, a lot of bizarre choices were made with it. I remember it being a bit of a disappointment when it came out back in 2013. I found it to be the weakest in the Dead Space series, no questions asked. But unlike Dead Space 1 and 2, that I have played and beaten numerous times, Dead Space 3 is the outlier. I beat it when it first came out, and then haven't touched it since. I've thrown it aside, forgot it even existed in a lot of ways, and my negative thoughts on it may have risen to the surface over the years, with the positive aspects of the game, the redeeming qualities it does have, left ignored and lying dormant, frozen, beneath layers and layers of ice and snow. I want to thank you very much for watching and listening to my review of Dead Space 2. I hope you got something out of it, and make sure to let me know your thoughts on the game down in the comments section below. If you'd like to support the channel and all of the content I create, ensuring I can continue to make more of it in the future, you can do so by subscribing, sharing, hitting that bell icon for notifications, and by becoming a producer on Patreon if you can. I will see you all in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and always stay nerdy.